June 19, 1966. What should have been a champagne-soaked celebration turned into humiliation. Henry Ford, too, believed he had secured Ferrari, ready to place the jewel of Italian racing under Detroit's banner. Contracts were drafted, lawyers satisfied, victory dinners scheduled. But then the telegram arrived. Enzo Ferrari tore up the deal, walked away, and left Ford humiliated. To twist the knife, Ferrari mocked him publicly, sneering that Ford was nothing more than a fat tractor salesman. That insult reverberated through Dearborn like a slap across the face of American pride. This was no longer about business, it was personal. And from that moment, Ford's mission was not to win, but to destroy Ferrari on the one battlefield that mattered, Le Mans, the 24-hour crucible of speed, endurance, and prestige. Ford's boardrooms turned into war councils. If Ferrari had his 12-cylinder thoroughbreds, then Ford would unleash something bigger, meaner, and utterly American. It wouldn't be a precision timepiece, it would be an anvil, a weapon. Henry Ford, too, gave his engineers a blank check. Build an engine so brutal it could not just compete, but crush. Thus, the seed of the 427 side oiler was planted not in Triumph PH, but in the ashes of betrayal. Every dollar, every sleepless night poured into its development carried the weight of that insult. It wasn't about prestige anymore. It was vengeance in cast iron. But vengeance is expensive, and Ford's first strikes went terribly wrong. At Le Mans in 1964, every GT40 fitted with early FE engines detonated before hour 9. The New York Times mocked, "Ford's tractors belong in cornfields." The embarrassment deepened. Ford had the money, but not yet the machine. And so the engineers dug in deeper. To silence Ferrari, Ford first had to silence its own demons: fragility, failure, and ridicule. That's where the story of the side oiler truly begins. Le Mans, 1964. The roar of Ford's GT40S promised a new era, sleek American machines taking the fight to Ferrari's Scarlet Stallions. But by hour 9, the promise turned to ashes. One by one, Ford's engines blew apart under the relentless strain of 7,000 RPM. Bearings scorched, oil pressure collapsed, and pistons welded themselves into molten ruin. The New York Times mocked mercilessly, "Ford's tractors belong in cornfields." For a company that had just gambled millions to challenge Europe's crown jewel of endurance racing, the humiliation was complete. Every boardroom at Dearborn echoed with the same uncomfortable truth. Ford was the titan of the auto industry, selling millions of cars worldwide, yet when it came to racing, they were amateurs. Ferrari had conquered Le Mans 6 years in a row. Ford? Dead last. Henry Ford II's reputation, already scarred by Ferrari's insult, now teetered on open ridicule. But failure can be fuel. Each blown engine was an autopsy, each wrecked GT40 a lesson. The engineers discovered a fatal flaw in their top oiler FE engines. The oil system prioritized the camshaft and valve train, starving the crankshaft of lubrication under high RPM. It was a design fit for the street, but fatal on a 3,000-mile crucible like Le Mans. This weakness became Ford's obsession. The ridicule from Europe was more than bad press. It was a dagger to the heart of American pride. If Ferrari ruled Le Mans with elegance, Ford would answer with brutality. To achieve that, they needed not just more horsepower, but reliability, an engine that could thunder through the night without begging for mercy. The stage was set for a quiet, unassuming engineer named Bill Innes. In Dearborn's Skunk Works, away from the headlines, he began sketching an idea that would change racing history. It wasn't bigger displacement or fancier carburetors. It was a new way to keep an engine alive, and it would earn the nickname that struck fear across pit lanes: the side oiler. In the sterile corridors of Dearborn's Skunk Works, Ford's salvation came not from boardroom strategists or star drivers, but from a quiet engineer named Bill Innes. His task wasn't glamorous, fix the oiling system, yet in that seemingly mundane assignment lay the key to defeating Ferrari. Innes studied the carnage bearings, charred black, crank journals scarred like battlefield relics. The pattern was unmistakable. The crankshaft, the very heart of the engine, was starving. Ford's FE top oiler design routed oil to the cam and valve train first, leaving the crank to make do with what pressure remained. Fine for a Sunday cruise, deadly for an engine screaming at 6,500 RPM for 24 straight hours. Innes knew the truth. Until oil reached the crank first, Ford would never finish Le Mans. His solution was radical. Carve a new oil gallery directly into the block, running parallel to the crankshaft along its side. Instead of feeding the top end first, oil would rush directly to the mains and rods, then climb upward. Mechanics dubbed it the side oiler. Simple in theory, revolutionary in practice. There was just one problem: cost. Each block required over 200 hours of hand machining to drill, reinforce, and finish the new gallery. Executives balked. Why spend so much on an engine so few would ever see? But Innes fought back with a line that became legend: "If you want to beat Ferrari, you bleed for it." Early prototypes still failed at Daytona. Fred Lorenzen's 427 grenaded after 47 laps. But when the design held together, it did so with the strength of an anvil. Suddenly, Ford had an engine that could survive the violence of endurance racing. And yet, the side oiler was more than durability. It was a declaration that Ford was willing to reinvent its very heart to take down Ferrari. The war was no longer about power alone. It was about survival. And survival would demand even more changes, because brute strength exposed weaknesses everywhere else in the machine. The 427-side oiler solved Ford's fatal flaw, but new strength revealed new weaknesses. At Daytona and Le Mans, the engine roared past 500 horsepower, producing torque figures near 480 medf. That kind of brute force didn't just stress the crankshaft, it tore the entire car apart. Radiators boiled over. Oil temps spiked. Head gaskets blew like shotgun shells. Even when the side oiler survived, the transaxles in GT40S shattered, never designed to endure this kind of punishment. Ken Miles spat in frustration. "You give me a grenade and tell me not to pull the pin." NASCAR told the same story. Early Galaxies fitted with the 427 sheared gear teeth, snapped axles, and left drivers stranded in a haze of smoke. The side oiler was no longer the weak link, the rest of the machine was. Every lap at 7,000 RPM was a brutal test, not just of Ford's engine, but of every bolt holding their cars together. If Ferrari built precision watches, Ford was swinging a sledgehammer. To wield it, they needed armor. Shelby's crew demanded tougher gearboxes. The T44 transaxle, a heavy-duty design, finally allowed the GT40 Mi2 to channel the side oiler's fury without exploding. Cooling systems were reworked, bigger radiators, high-flow pumps, external oil coolers tested at Sebring and Daytona until the engine could run all night without melting itself alive. These fixes weren't elegant. They added weight and bulk, but they were necessary. In endurance racing, reliability is the true weapon. Ferrari had finesse, but Ford was building something indestructible. Piece by piece, every weakness exposed by the side oiler was patched, reinforced, rebuilt, stronger. And when the dust settled, the stage was set for a showdown. Ferrari's Jewel Box 330 P3S would meet Ford's Iron Hammer at Le Mans 1966. The question was no longer if the side oiler could survive it, was whether Ferrari could withstand its relentless assault. June 19, 1966. Dawn broke over Le Mans, and history shifted with it. On the Mulsanne Straight, 3 Ford GT40 MIC2s thundered past the checkered flag in unison, first, second, third. The crowd gasped, not just at the victory, but at the humiliation of Enzo Ferrari, whose prized 330 P3S had all retired in mechanical defeat. For years, Ferrari had owned this race, winning 6 straight, treating Le Mans as his personal kingdom. That morning, the crown was ripped from his head. Hollywood later painted the drama around the drivers Ken Miles, Bruce McLaren, Denny Hume, but buried deeper was the real executioner, the 427 side oiler. For 24 relentless hours it pulled at full throttle, shoving the GT40S past 200 mph, lap after lap without a single failure. No cracked bearings, no oil starvation, no broken cranks. Just the steady, brutal rhythm of American vengeance. The side oiler didn't just help Ford when it changed the balance of power in motorsport. Ferrari's engines were masterpieces of finesse, jewels of engineering, but they cracked under the marathon strain. The side oiler was different. Ugly, heavy, cast-iron brute force. Shelby said it best. Ferrari built watches, we built anvils. And those anvils smashed Ferrari's dynasty. Ford didn't just win, they staged a 1-2-3 sweep, silencing critics and proving that Detroit's iron could dominate Europe's sacred track. For Henry Ford, too, it was more than a trophy. It was personal redemption. The insult from 1963 was avenged on the most public stage possible. But the side oiler's story didn't end in France. That same hammer that crushed Ferrari would go on to flatten NASCAR ovals and terrorize quarter miles across America. The victory at Le Mans was the birth of its legend. Now it was time to prove that brute force could rule not just endurance, but every arena of racing. Le Mans made headlines in Europe, but back home in America, the real test of power was NASCAR's high banks and the quarter-mile drag strip. There, engines weren't asked to whisper endurance, they were commanded to scream for glory, and the 427 side oiler rose to the challenge. At the 1965 Daytona 500, Fred Lorenzen, Fast Freddy, piloted his Ford Galaxie fitted with a side oiler to victory, harnessing more than 500 horsepower for 500 punishing miles. The engine didn't just survive, it dominated, holding speeds over 180 mph on the 2.5-mile oval. That win cemented Ford's place as a threat in stock car racing, and the side oiler became the new standard-bearer. On shorter ovals, drivers like Ned Jarrett and David Pearson exploited the 427's torque to blast out of corners while rivals struggled to keep pace. NASCAR's grueling season tested reliability week after week, and the side oiler proved it could take the abuse. Its cross-bolted main caps and reinforced webs made it nearly bulletproof under stress. Where Chrysler's mighty Hemi sometimes faltered, Ford's iron hammer kept swinging. And then came the drag strip. In 1964, Ford's lightweight Fairlane Thunderbolt, fitted with the 427, rewrote the rulebook in superstock. With quarter-mile times in the low 11s, it left competitors stunned. Gas Rhonda and Dick Brannon turned the side oiler into a launcher's power ad, its torque delivering savage hole shots that made the crowd roar. By the late 60s, funny cars and top-fuel dragsters were squeezing as much as 2,500 horsepower from the block, proof of how far tuners could push its design. Whether thundering around Daytona or ripping down a 1,320-foot strip, the 427 side oiler became more than an engine, it was a symbol. It proved America didn't just build tractors. It built monsters that could win on any battlefield. And yet, the side oiler's fame didn't rest only in stock cars and dragsters. Its greatest cultural footprint came wrapped in a small British chassis with Carroll Shelby's name stamped on it, the Cobra. If NASCAR proved the 427 side oiler could conquer ovals and drag racing showed its fury in a straight line, then Carroll Shelby's Cobra revealed its most seductive form, American brute force wrapped in European grace. The AC chassis from England was light, nimble, almost delicate, but when Shelby dropped a 427 side oiler under its hood, the result was anything but. Overnight, the Cobra became a road-legal missile, an unholy fusion of refinement and raw violence. On the streets, the Cobra's 425 horsepower in mild tune was enough to terrify anyone foolish enough to challenge it. On the track, tuned for over 500 horsepower, it shredded Corvettes and Jaguars with ruthless ease. Drivers like Bob Bondurant and Dave McDonald showcased its ability to accelerate like a dragster yet corner with European poise. It wasn't just winning races, It was rewriting what sports cars could be. The secret wasn't only power, it was reliability. Earlier FE engines had wilted under the sustained stress of road racing, but the side oiler's improved lubrication kept it alive through brutal cornering loads and high rev endurance. That meant the Cobra could hammer down straights, dive into corners, and do it again without self-destructing. For racers, that was the difference between finishing and limping home. The Cobra's dominance in the Sports Car Club of America and its A production championships made it a legend. More importantly, it cemented the side oiler as the beating heart of American sports car supremacy. Here was proof that Detroit iron could dance with Europe's best and win. But every golden era has shadows. By the late 1960s, storm clouds gathered. New laws, rising insurance costs, and an industry shifting away from high-compression monsters threatened to end the reign of engines like the 427. The Cobra and GT40 had carried the side oiler to glory, but the question was looming. How long could such a beast survive in a changing world? By 1968, the same engine that had crushed Ferrari, conquered Daytona, and terrorized drag strips faced a new enemy. Not a rival automaker, but politics and insurance companies. The Clean Air Act tightened emissions standards, and suddenly high-compression brutes like the 427 side oiler became liabilities. It demanded high-octane fuel, belched emissions regulators wanted gone, and insurers began blacklisting muscle cars, punishing young drivers with sky-high premiums. In a single stroke, the climate that gave birth to monsters like the side oiler turned hostile. Ford reacted swiftly. The Cobra Jet 4828 and the 3825 Series 429 replaced the 4827 in showrooms, offering power with more compliance for the new era. The side oiler, designed purely for war, was never meant to play nice on the street. Production ended by 1969, and only around 300 street-legal side oilers ever rolled out of Ford's plants. Mechanics wept as unsold blocks were scrapped, iron relics tossed aside like yesterday's tools. For enthusiasts, it was the end of an era. Engines were getting softer, safer, and quieter. But nothing felt like the side oiler, an engine that pulled like a freight train and roared like vengeance itself. By the early 1970s, it was already legend, whispered about in garages as the one Ford engine that could humble Ferrari and frighten Chrysler's Hemi. Its disappearance gave it mystique. Survivors were scarce, battered from racing or retired to barns. Collectors began to covet them, chasing cracked blocks like archaeologists hunting fossils. The fall of the side oiler wasn't just technical, it was cultural. It symbolized the shift from raw, untamed horsepower to the restrained, regulated engines of the 1970s. But legends don't stay buried. By the 1980s, nostalgia and rising collector interest would breathe new life into the side oiler. The Cobra and GT40, immortalized in history, would spark a demand to bring the beast back. And when Carroll Shelby returned to answer that call, the side oiler rose again. By the 1980s, the muscle car era was long gone. But nostalgia had teeth. Collectors began hunting the legends of the 1960 Shelby Cobras, GT40S, and the brutal engines that powered them. Auction prices soared into the millions. Yet there was one problem. The 427 side oiler was extinct. Ford had killed it in 1969, and most surviving blocks were cracked from years of racing abuse or scrapped by dealers who never saw their future worth. To build a true Cobra, you needed the heart that made it infamous. Without the side oiler, the legend felt incomplete. Carroll Shelby understood this better than anyone. In the late 80s, as replicas flooded the market, he launched the Continuation Cobra program. These weren't kit cars, they were real Cobras, assigned fresh CSX serial numbers that picked up where the 1960 run had left off. But authenticity demanded the impossible, resurrecting the side oiler itself. Ford Performance dusted off the original blueprints from 1966, 1968, and 1973. Using modern metallurgy, Shelby's team cast new blocks in high nickel iron or lighter aluminum for the CSX 4000 and CSX 6000 series Cobras. The side-mount oil gallery was faithfully recreated, cross-bolted mains reinforced, the classic 4.233 bore and 3.784 stroke retained. Every block was hand-assembled, dyno-tested, and tuned not just for power, but for the thunderous sound and freight train torque that defined the legend. Depending on configuration, these revived engines made 500 to 750 horsepower, yet they kept the soul of the original. Collectors lined up, and prices skyrocketed. A Cobra continuation with a real side oiler commanded six figures easily, some climbing into the millions at auction. For purists, nothing else mattered. The watchmaker precision of Ferrari was respectable, but the side oiler's iron brutality was irreplaceable. The resurrection proved what history had already whispered: legends don't die, they wait. The side oiler began life as an insult turned into vengeance, silenced Ferrari at Le Mans, ruled NASCAR, terrorized drag strips, and vanished under regulation. Under the current, decades later, stronger than ever, its story is not just about horsepower, it is about pride, resilience, and the engine that forced the world to take Detroit seriously. And that's the tale of Ford's 427 side oiler, the thunderous powerhouse that didn't just win races, but silenced Enzo Ferrari on the world stage in 1966. It wasn't just horsepower, it was payback, precision, and pride. Now I want to hear from you. Is this the ultimate revenge engine in muscle car history? Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this dive into racing legends, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories from Muscle Cars Revolution.